The XDiavel is a perfect example of the Ducati design approach. First, the designers decided what constitutes a cruiser as seen through its research of the American market. Next, the designers processed the information through the filter of Ducati styling, technology and performance to settle on what the key features would be. In the case of the XDiavel, the cruiser traits are relaxed, low-speed riding, the call of travel, and a feet-forward riding position. On the Ducati half of the DNA, signature Italian style crafted with the latest engineering and delivering a hefty dose of performance. This folding together of the somewhat contradictory design goals is what puts the X in XDiavel. 2016 Ducati XDiavel Action. This is the heart of a champion. While the engine is always important in a motorcycle, in cruisers it is the crown jewel, the centerpiece of the bike's design while simultaneously being the heart of its functionality. The Ducati Testastretta DVT 1262 takes this to the extreme, in a most positive way. With the Multistrada 1200 engine as its starting point, Ducati's engineers massaged and reshaped the L-twin to a form more appropriate for Ducati-style cruiser duty. The 1262cc displacement comes courtesy of a longer stroke, yielding bore and stroke dimensions of 106.0 mm by 71.5 mm. The DVT moniker in the name stands for Desmodromic Variable Timing, which first appeared in the Multistrada 1200 last year, where it varies the timing of both the intake and exhaust camshafts independently, allowing the engine to deliver the seemingly impossible bottom-end grunt and top-end oomph. To learn about DVT, our 2015 Ducati Multistrada 1200 and 1200's first ride review has all the details, including video. 2016 Ducati XDiavel engine right side. The machined belt covers of the XDiavel S highlight the L shape of the cylinders. The trellis frame and the swing arm pivot assembly use the engine as a stressed member. Cruiser riders don't normally spin their bike's engine up to the RPM limit. Instead, they usually rely on the bottom-end torque as the primary motivating factor. Ducati have clearly studied this phenomena and have moved to address this with the XDiavel. The result is a claimed torque peak of 95 pounds-to-foot at 5,000 revolutions per minute. While that RPM level may be a bit high for traditional cruisers, in fact, on many cruisers, that would be approaching the rev ceiling, the peak is significantly lower than on the previous XDiavel and then remains relatively flat until 7,500 revolutions per minute. However, what cruiser riders typically have not experienced is the soul-stirring, deep intake howl emitted as the Testastratta's superbike roots come online, thrusting the XDiavel forward with such force that they'll be thankful for the bolster at the back of the seat, since the feet and hands forward riding position gives the rider very little with which to combat the acceleration other than upper body strength. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Compression was bumped from 12.5 to 1 on the MTS to a healthy 13 to 1 on the XDiavel. While the Bosch electronic injection system utilizes the same 56 mm elliptical throttle bodies, the ride-by-wire, RBW, has, not surprisingly, been completely reworked. Ducati being Ducati, the engine also has a host of electronic goodies to provide the rider with a variety of power delivery options. The three riding modes are Sport, Touring, and Urban, each of which also features distinct Ducati traction control, DTC, and ABS settings. For 2016 Ducati's XDiavel tank and instruments. The TFD display is easy to read in all lighting conditions, relaying all the information needed at a glance. From a power delivery perspective, the Sport mode naturally brings all 156 horses into play with the relationship between the right grip and the throttle's butterflies a 1-to-1 ratio, giving the most direct relationship with the rider. The DTC is also set to its least intrusive preset level. In Touring mode, the whole stable is still available, but at lower RPM the throttle response is softened by lessening the ratio of wrist input to throttle opening. However, as the rider opens the throttle further, The ratio changes to the point that, in the widest portions of throttle opening, it ultimately returns to the 1:1 ratio of sport mode. Urban mode drops power output to 100 horsepower and further softens the throttle inputs to civilize the savage in the confines of the city, and presumably slippery conditions. DTC gets progressively more assertive with touring and urban modes. Here's where regular readers, who are familiar with my penchant for smooth throttle response, may be in for a surprise. In my quest for bobble-free on-off on-throttle transitions on the street, I am often willing to sacrifice a bit of power on the altar of smoothness. Frequently, I feel that RBW Sport mode is shorthand for abrupt mode, and normal is actually the most streetable setting. Well, the XDiavel lays that belief to rest. While we're on the topic of power, let's take a moment to consider the XDiavel's output. While Ducati's reps made much of the increase in torque in the bottom end of the RPM range when compared to the old diavel, and it was there, the XD still doesn't clear its throat until the tach clears 3,500 revolutions per minute. Below that, the engine will accelerate, but it also shudders as the cylinders try to deliver thrust from each power stroke. Above 4,000 revolutions per minute, it's ready to rock. The Testastreta's Superbike power plant gives riders the luxury of choosing two riding techniques. One can loaf along in a single gear rolling between 4,000 and 6,500 revolutions per minute, content to use the engine as a giant rheostat, or if you're in the mood for some shenanigans, drop down a gear or two and let the L-twin pleasure you early. However, the real joy of the XD comes from turning the loud tap to 11 and holding on for dear life. 2016 Ducati XDiavel Action. The forward thrust provided by the linear power band up to those 156 horses is exciting. Add in the clamshell riding position in which your grip and upper body strength, plus unappreciated assist from the seat's bolster, are the only things holding you on the bike, and you're in for the ride of a lifetime. I've ridden a ton of hopped-up cruisers, including a dual supercharged Valkyrie, and no factory cruiser has ever widened my eyes to such an extreme. One of my compatriots topped the ton in third gear. The new electronic feature that has been the topic of much discussion amongst the most staff is the Ducati Power Launch, DPL. This special launch mode is so cool that it gets its own button safely tucked away behind the front brake reservoir. Pressing the DPL button directs the rider to a screen with three choices. The first gives the least intervention in the form of DTC and wheelie control, while the third gives the most. Once the level of protection is selected, a screen tells the rider to place the transmission in first and crank the throttle WFO. Once you're underway, the electronics take over to save your butt until you either reach 74.6 miles per hour, 120 kilometers per hour, or you shift to third gear. Also, it disengages if your speed drops to 3.1 miles per hour, 5 kilometers per hour. Other than stating that the DPL would only allow 3 launches before a prescribed cool-down period was enforced, the press briefing covered nothing else about this mode. The switchgear includes red LED lighting for easy night access. During one of the photo stops, I asked a ride leader if there was a place scheduled for us to try DPL for ourselves and was shocked to discover that we were not going to test it. The thought that I wouldn't get to test DPL began to eat away at the back of my brain, like a rat gnawing on wiring inside a wall. The XDiavel S features a stylish LED daytime running light. If you've spent any time at drag races, you've seen racers crank the throttle to the stop, and, when the starting tree shows amber, dump the clutch. As my buddy, former co-worker, and erstwhile editor for a drag racing magazine, Peter Jones puts it, in the classes that let you run multi-stage lock-up clutches or launch control, if you're modulating your clutch at all, you've already lost. The parameters for the launch are programmed into the system in the pits. It was in this spirit that I selected DPL Level 3 for the most intervention pin to throttle, and dumped the clutch.